good evening, everybody, and welcome to our Anam Cara Thursday night meditation program. And with all my heart and with all my love, I welcome you to our program tonight. Thank you so much for coming. It's such a gorgeous evening here, and I know people are now feeling like, oh, we need to get outside. It's been so long. And so thank you for taking the time to join us this evening and bringing, the power of your commitment to practices, to set aside the time to come and be a part of satsang when there are so many other things that might be drawing our attention, but to have that commitment to being in the company of others and doing practices that put us in touch with the highest wisdom, the highest truth of who we are, and empower us to live that into the world. And it's really taking refuge in the practices, taking refuge in that highest truth that empowers us to deal with all the things that are going on in the world today by having that calm, steady center of wisdom from which we can be present with others, be present with what's going on in the world, with loving compassion, with wisdom, with patience. That really takes that kind of commitment that you have to practices. So thank you for that and coming this evening and sharing the power of your practices and the power of your presence, because that's the real essence of it all, is the divine presence that each one of you carries. Each one of you is the embodiment of. So thank you. To know that more deeply, we do the practices. So we're going to start with the opening mantras. And the opening mantras are a way of invoking that direct experience. So mantra, though it starts out seeming like a set of words in Sanskrit, and the mind is familiar with words, but mantra is really a throb of the infinite. Mantra extends all the way from the sound form and the thought form, all the way down, getting more and more subtle, but more and more powerful. It throbs as light. It throbs as consciousness. It throbs as the consciousness of I am. The I am awareness is the root of mantra. And by dissolving ourselves into mantra, we come to know that highest reality. And that's what is the ground of our being, the ground of our existence, and is the solid ground that gives us the support for walking our lives in the world. So we'll start with the opening mantras. Shrimate Kalim Devi Ki Jai Gajananam Bhutta Ganari Sevitam Kalpita Jambu Palacharu Bhakshanam Umasutam Shokam Vinashakarakam Namami Vigneshwara Parapankajam Shri Vanishaya Namaha Shri Vanishaya Namaha Shri Vanishaya Namaha Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamandaya Purnamevavashishate Om Shanti 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 Shri Mata Kali Mahadevi Ki Jai. So once again, with all my heart, I welcome you to our program this evening. That luscious spaciousness of silence and stillness, also known as the Divine Mother, that which gives birth to all forms. Everything arises out of that. All our thoughts, everything. Actually, the entire universe arises out of that. Now this evening, what I thought I would do is a reading. And I've shared some from Lex Hickson's books on Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, great sage of the 19th century in Bengal and India, just a God-intoxicated being, and especially a devotee of Ma Kali. And so I'm going to be reading from Sri Ramakrishna, the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, and this was a translation and a rendition offered by Swami Nikhilananda, one of the disciples of the great disciple of Ramakrishna, known as Swami Vivekananda. And this is a picture of Sri Ramakrishna. I want to show you that. You could see that. Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. This is the Ramakrishna Vivekananda Center in New York, is what put out this book. And he was a proponent of the highest teachings of non-dual, the essence of unity consciousness. But he was this ecstatic, also bhakta, this ecstatic lover of the divine, especially in the form of the Great Mother. And so I thought I'd read some about him and his experiences. And it sort of takes us back into 19th century India and what the flavor of the culture and the practices that were being done at that time. Ramakrishna was born in 1836 and born as a Brahmin in a Brahmin family. And at that time, if you were a Brahmin, most of what you did were rituals and practices. In a sense, that was also how you made your living. And that would be tending to temples and doing practices for other Brahmins and other kinds of rituals and ceremonies that needed to be done. The Brahmin priests were the holders of the rituals, the chants, the mantras, everything like that. And it was into that kind of family, though they were of sort of humble origins in a rural village in India, but they were Brahmins, and that's how Ramakrishna began his early life. And even as a child, he was showing signs of going into these God-intoxicated states. And his parents actually said that they had visions before he was born, and visions that Lord Vishnu came to them and said that there was going to be this very special child born to them. Now, they were in their 60s, so there was already a very auspicious birth that Ramakrishna was heralded coming into this world. And he grew up and was surrounded in a small village by Brahmins. His older brother was also a Brahmin priest and became more of a scholar and went into the world doing that. And actually brought Ramakrishna, his younger brother, to Calcutta to sort of get him employed, get him to work in his teens, to get sort of oriented towards that next phase of life as a householder. But Ramakrishna was so dedicated toward the experience of knowing the divine. He didn't show much interest in that, and it was much to his brother's chagrin that he wasn't getting engaged in sort of the family business of being a Brahmin priest. And it was his brother, Ramakumar, who really wanted him to do that and said, well, you have to become a breadwinner. And so you have to do these things. And Ramakrishna very famously said to him, brother, what shall I do with a mere bread-winning education? Because he wanted to know God. So though he wasn't like a sannyasin, a renunciate, in the state of his being, he was not interested in a worldly life or the pursuits of a worldly life, of a family, of children, especially at that time, the Brahmins were a part of sort of the culture and society where they were given a lot of money, especially in Calcutta, to take care of the rituals and practices. But they had become a bit decadent, and that was really turning Ramakrishna off as well. Now, in Calcutta, there was a woman, her name was Rani Rasmani, and she was a wealthy widow, and it was she who took Ramakrishna under her wing. And so I'm going to read some of what Nikhilananda writes about the life of Ramakrishna. It's actually a translation that one of his of a work that one of Ramakrishna's disciples had written in the late 1800s, and Nikhilananda later, like in the 1930s, translated into English. And so he begins in this section talking about the Kali temple at Dakshineshwar, and that's where this woman, Rani Rasmani, had built this extraordinary temple. And so he writes, at that time there lived in Calcutta a rich widow named Rani Rasmani, belonging to the Shudra class. Now the Shudra caste was sort of the lowest. They were kind of the artisans, and they served the other classes through their work. So they didn't have the social status, but through her work she had become quite wealthy. And so this woman was known far and wide, not only for her business ability, courage, and intelligence, but also for her largesse of heart and piety and devotion to God. She was assisted in the management of her vast property by her son-in-law, Mathur Mohan, later also called Babu Mohan, like uncle, and became very close to Ramakrishna. In 1847, Rani purchased 20 acres of land in Dakshineshwar, a village about 4 miles north of Calcutta, and here she created a temple garden and constructed several temples. Her chosen deity was the Divine Mother, Kali. Now, the temple garden stands directly on the east bank of the Ganges. The northern section of land and a portion to the east contain an orchard and flower gardens and 2 small reservoirs. The southern section is paved with brick and mortar, and the visitor arriving by boat ascends the steps to an imposing bathing ghat, which leads to Chandni, the roofed terrace, on either side of which stands a row of 6 temples to Shiva. East of the terrace and the Shiva temples is a large court, paved, rectangular in shape, and running north and south. 2 temples stand in the center of this court. The larger one to the south facing south is dedicated to Kali. The smaller one facing the Ganges is to Radhakant, that is Krishna and the consort of Radha. 9 domes with spires surmount the temple of Kali, and before it stands the spacious Nat Mandir, or music hall, and the terrace on which is supported by stately pillars. At the northwest and southwest corners of the temple compound are 2 nahabats, or music towers, from which music flows at different times of the day, especially at sunup, noon, and sundown, when the worship is performed in the temples. 3 sides of the paved courtyard, all except the west, are lined with rooms set apart for kitchens, storerooms, dining rooms, etc. And the chamber in the northwest angle, just beyond the last of the Shiva temples, is of special interest to us, for here Sri Ramakrishna was to spend a considerable part of his life. To the west of this chamber is a semicircular porch overlooking the river, and in front of the porch runs a footpath north and south, and beyond the path is a large garden, and below the garden the Ganges. The orchard to the north of the buildings contains the Panchavati, the banyan and bel tree, associated with Sri Ramakrishna's spiritual practices. Outside and to the north of the temple compound proper is the kuti, or bungalow, used by members of Rani Rasmani's family visiting the garden. And at the north of the temple garden, separated by a high wall, was a British government facility. So there were these 12 Shiva temples, 6 on either side. Then there was that beautiful temple to Radha and Krishna, or Radhakanta temple. But the main temple is dedicated to Kali, the Divine Mother, here worshipped as Bhavatarini, the savior of the universe. The floor of this temple is also paved with marble, and the basalt image of the Mother, dressed in a gorgeous gold brocade, stands on a white marble image of the prostrate body of her divine consort, Shiva, the symbol of the Absolute. On the feet of the goddess are jeweled ornaments she wears, and anklets of gold. Her arms are decked with jeweled ornaments of gold as well. She wears necklaces of gold and pearls and golden crown, golden earrings, and a golden nose ring with a pearl drop. She has 4 arms. The lower left hand holds a severed human head, and the upper has a blood-stained saber. One right hand offers boons to her children, and the other allays their fear. So it combines the terror and destruction with the reassurance of motherly tenderness. So you can see her, she has a Bhaya mudra, she has this mudra for offering, but she's also holding a head and the sword by which she cut that. That's demonstrating how she cuts off all the deluded thoughts that arise, all the obstacles that arise in the disciple or devotee's mind. The majesty of her posture can hardly be described. It combines the terror of destruction with the reassurance of motherly tenderness. For she is the cosmic power, the totality of the universe, a glorious harmony of the pairs of opposites. She deals out death as she creates and preserves. She has 3 eyes, the third eye being the symbol of divine wisdom. And they strike dismay into the wicked, yet pour out affection to her devotees. The whole symbolic world is represented in the temple garden. The trinity of Nature Mother, Kali, the Absolute Shiva, and pure love, that of Radhakanta. The arch spanning the heavens and the earth. The terrific goddess of the Tantra, the soul-enthralling flute player of the Bhagavata, and the self-absorbed absolute of the Vedas live together, creating the greatest synthesis of all religions. All aspects of reality are presented there. But of this divine household, Kali is the pivot, the sovereign mistress. She is Prakriti, the procreatrix, nature, the destroyer, the creator. Nay, she is something greater and deeper still for those who have eyes to see. She is the universal mother, my mother, as Ramakrishna would say. Or the all-powerful, she reveals herself to her children under different aspects and divine incarnations. The visible God who leads the elect to the invisible reality. And, if she so pleases, she takes away the last trace of ego from created beings and merges in the consciousness of the Absolute, the undifferentiated God. Through her grace, the finite ego loses it and becomes Atman, Brahman, as in the Mahavakya, Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman, the Absolute, the Infinite. So Rani Rasmani spent a fortune in the construction of the temple garden and another fortune in the dedication ceremony, which took place on May 31st in 1855. Sri Ramakrishna came to the temple garden with his elder brother Ramakumar, who was appointed priest of the Kali temple. Sri Ramakrishna did not at first approve of Ramakumar's working for a Shudra Rasmani. The example of their orthodox father was still fresh in Sri Ramakrishna's mind. He objected also to the eating of cooked foods and offerings to the temple, since according to orthodox Hindu customs, such food can be offered to the deity only in the house of a Brahmin. but the holy atmosphere of the temple grounds, the solitude of the surrounding wood, the loving care of his brother, and the respect shown him by Rani Rasmani and Mathur Babu, the living presence of goddess Kali in the temple, and above all the proximity of the sacred Ganges, which Sri Ramakrishna always held in the highest respect, gradually overcame his disapproval, and he began to feel at home. Within a very short time, Sri Ramakrishna attracted the notice of Mathur Babu, who was impressed by the young man's religious fervor and wanted him to participate in the worship in the Kali temple. But Sri Ramakrishna loved his freedom and was indifferent to any worldly career. The profession of priesthood in the temple, founded by a rich woman, did not appeal to his mind. And further, he hesitated to take upon himself the responsibility for the ornaments and the jewelry of the temple. So Mathur had to wait for a suitable occasion. It wasn't long before a youth of 16, destined to play an important role in Sri Ramakrishna's life. His name was Hriday, a distant nephew of Sri Ramakrishna, and hailed from Sihor, a village not far from Kamarpukur. And he had been his boyhood friend, clever, exceptionally energetic, and endowed with a great presence of mind. He moved, as well will be seen later, like a shadow about his uncle, and always was ready to help him, even at the sacrifice of his own comfort. He was destined to be a witness of the many spiritual experiences of Sri Ramakrishna and the caretaker of his body during the stormy days of his spiritual practice. Hriday came to Dakshineshwar in search of a job, and Sri Ramakrishna was glad to see him. Unable to resist the persuasion of Mathur Babu, Sri Ramakrishna at last entered the temple service on the condition that Hriday should be asked to assist him. And his first duty was to dress and decorate the image of Kali. One day, the priest of Radhakant temple accidentally dropped the image of Krishna on the floor, breaking one of his legs. The pundits advised Rani to install a new image, since the worship of an image with a broken limb was against scriptural injunctions. But Rani was fond of the image, and she asked Sri Ramakrishna's opinion. And he was in a kind of a mood of absorption, and he said, "The solution is ridiculous. If a son-in-law of Rani broke his legs, would she discard him and put another in its place? Wouldn't she rather arrange for his treatment? Why should she not do the same for in this case too? Let the image be repaired and worshipped as before." It was a simple and straightforward solution and was accepted by Rani. And Sri Ramakrishna himself took to mending the break. And the priest was dismissed for his carelessness. Now, born in an Orthodox family, Sri Ramakrishna knew the formalities of worship and its rites and its rituals, the innumerable gods and goddesses of the Hindu religion, and the human aspects of the indescribable, incomprehensible spirit, as conceived by the finite mind. They understand and appreciate human love and emotion, and help men to realize their secular and spiritual ideals, and ultimately enable men to attain liberation from the miseries of phenomenal life. The source of light, intelligence, wisdom, and strength is the one alone from whom comes the fulfillment of desire. Yet, as long as man is bound in his human limitations, he cannot but worship God through human forms. He must use human symbols. Therefore, Hinduism asks of the devotee to look on God as the ideal father, the ideal mother, the ideal husband, the ideal wife, the ideal son, the ideal friend. But the name ultimately leads to the nameless. The form leads to the formless. The word leads to silence. And the emotion to the serene realization of peace in existence, knowledge, and bliss absolute. That's what we'd spoken about in the past. That's Satchidananda. So the gods gradually merge into one God. But until that realization is achieved, The devotee cannot dissociate human factors from his worship. Therefore, the deity is bathed and clothed and decked in ornaments, is fed and put to sleep. He is propitiated with hymns and songs and prayers, and there are appropriate rites connected with all of these functions. And for instance, to secure for himself eternal purity, the priest bathes himself in holy waters and puts on holy cloth. He purifies the mind and the sense organs by appropriate meditations. He fortifies his place of worship against evil forces by drawing around it circles of fire and water. He awakens the different spiritual centers of his body and invokes the Supreme Spirit in his heart. Then he transfers the Supreme Spirit to the image before him and worships that image, regarding it no longer as clay or stone, but as an embodiment of the highest, throbbing with the life of pure consciousness. After the worship, the Supreme Spirit is recalled from the image to its true sanctuary, the heart of the priest. And the real devotee knows the absurdity of worshiping the transcendental reality in material forms and articles and clothing, that which pervades the whole universe and is beyond, putting on the pedestal that which cannot be limited by time and space, feeding that which is disembodied and incorporeal, singing before that whose glory the music of the spheres tries vainly to proclaim. But through these rites, the devotee aspires to go ultimately beyond the rites and rituals, forms and names, words and praise, to realize God as the all-pervading consciousness. Now, Hindu priests are thoroughly acquainted with the rites of worship, but few of them are aware of their underlying significance, and they move their hands and limbs mechanically in obedience to the letter of the scriptures and repeat the holy mantras like parrots. But from the very beginning, the inner meaning of these rites was revealed to Sri Ramakrishna, and as he sat facing the image, a strange transformation came over his mind. While going through the prescribed ceremonies, he would actually find himself encircled by a wall of fire protecting him, and the place of worship, and unspiritual vibrations. He would feel the rising of the mystic kundalini through the different centers of his body. The glow on his face and his deep absorption and the intense atmosphere of the temple impressed everyone who saw him worship the deity. Now, his brother Ramakumar wanted Ramakrishna to learn all the intricate rituals of the worship of Kali. To become a priest of Kali, one must undergo a special form of initiation from a qualified guru. And for Sri Ramakrishna, a suitable Brahmin was found. But no sooner did the Brahmin speak the holy word in his ear than Sri Ramakrishna, overwhelmed by emotion, uttered a loud cry and plunged into deep concentration and absorption in the divine. Mathur begged Sri Ramakrishna to take charge of the worship in the Kali temple, but the young priest pleaded his incompetence and his ignorance of the scriptures. Mathur insisted that devotion and sincerity would more than compensate for any lack of formal knowledge and make the Divine Mother manifest herself through the image. And in the end, Sri Ramakrishna yielded to Mathur's request and became the priest of Kali. And indeed, soon after, he soon discovered what a strange goddess he had chosen to serve. He became gradually enmeshed in the web of her all-pervading presence. To the ignorant, she is, to be sure, the image of destruction. But he found in her the benign, all-loving mother. Her neck is encircled with a garland of heads, and her waist a girdle of human arms. And two of her hands hold weapons of death, and her eyes dart a glance of fire. But strangely enough, Ramakrishna felt in her breath the soothing touch of a tender love, and saw in her the seed of immortality. She stands on the bosom of her consort Shiva. It is because she is Shakti, the power inseparable from the Absolute. She is surrounded by jackals and other unholy creatures, the denizens of cremation grounds. But is not the ultimate reality above holiness and unholiness? She appears to be reeling under the spell of wine. But who would create this mad world unless under the influence of divine drunkenness? She is the highest symbol of all the forces of nature, the synthesis of their antinomies, and the ultimate divine in the form of woman. She now became to Sri Ramakrishna the only reality, and the world became an unsubstantial shadow. Into her worship he poured his soul. Before him she stood as the transparent portal to the shrine of ineffable reality. The worship in the temple intensified Sri Ramakrishna's yearning for a living vision of the Mother of the universe. And he began meditation at the time, not actually employed in the temple service. For his purpose, he selected an extremely solitary place, a deep jungle, thick with underbrush and prickly plants that lay north of the temples, and it was used at one time as a burial ground, so it was shunned by people even during the daytime for fear of ghosts. There, Sri Ramakrishna began to spend the whole night in meditation, returning to his room in the morning with eyes swollen as though from much weeping. While meditating, he would lay aside his cloth and his Brahmanical thread, explaining the strange conduct. He once said to Hriday, "Don't you know that when one thinks of God, one should be freed of all ties? From our very birth, we have the 8 fetters of hatred, shame, lineage, pride of good conduct, fear, secretiveness, caste, and grief. Well, the sacred thread reminds me that I am a Brahmin and therefore superior to all. When calling on Mother, one has to set aside all such ideas." Well, Hriday thought his uncle was becoming insane. As his love for God deepened, he began either to forget or to drop the formalities of worship. Sitting before the image, he would spend hours singing devotional songs of the great devotees on the Mother, such as Kamalakant and Ram Prasad. These rhapsodical songs describing the direct visions of God only intensified Sri Ramakrishna's longing, and he felt the pangs of a child separated from its mother. Sometimes in agony, he would rub his face against the ground. And weep so bitterly, just thinking of it, separated from the mother. It was unbearable for him. In that grief he would cry out, "Art thou true, Mother, or is it all fiction, mere poetry, without any reality? If thou dost exist, why do I not see thee? Is religion a mere fantasy? Thou art only a figment of man's imagination?" Sometimes he would sit on the prayer carpet for hours like an inert object, and he began to behave in an abnormal manner, most of the time unconscious of the world. He almost gave up food and sleep, left him altogether. He would be left weeping. But he did not have long to wait. He thus described his first vision of the Mother. "I felt as if my heart was being squeezed like a wet towel. I was overpowered with great restlessness and a fear that it might not be my lot to realize her in this life. I could not bear the separation from her any longer. Life seemed to not be worth living at all. And then suddenly my glance fell on the sword that she kept in Mother's temple. I determined to put an end to my life. When I jumped up like a madman and seized it, suddenly the Blessed Mother revealed herself. The buildings with their different parts, the temple, everything else vanished from my sight, leaving no trace whatsoever. And in their stead I saw a limitless, infinite, effulgent, ocean of consciousness. As far as the eye could see, the shining billows were madly rushing at me from all sides with a terrific noise to swallow me up. I was panting for breath. I was caught in the rush and collapsed, unconscious. What was happening in the outside world, I did not know. But within me, there was a steady flow of undiluted bliss, altogether new, and I felt the presence of the Divine Mother. And on his lips, when he regained consciousness of the world, was the word, Ma, Ma. It goes on and on. Ma, Ma. That's what we're called to know. The ultimate reality, beyond all forms of worship. Ma, Ma. Oh, my beloved, what will you become when you're through becoming me? Infinite waves arise and subside, the infinite ocean of your sweet being, delighting in every form you take, and in turn, dissolving each in your loving embrace. All cravings are but one longing for the sublime joy of coming to rest in you. By your grace, all the streams and rivers of our desires, set in motion by you, flow irresistibly into you. Who can know your delight without becoming you? We know the infinite by dissolving in the infinite. We know the Mother by dissolving in the Mother. We know the auspicious one by dissolving into the auspicious one. So now we're going to chant the mantra, Om Kali Ma, Kali Durga Namo Nama, Om Kali Ma, the invocation of the Great Mother, the Divine Mother, your true nature, beyond all names and forms. Kali Durga Namo Nama, I bow to you, O Great Mother. You who have become all this and are beyond all this and hold it all in your mad, loving embrace. Om Kali Ma, Om Kali Ma, Om Kali Ma. Om Kali Ma, Om Kali Ma, Kali Durga Namo Namah, Kali Durga Namo Namah. Om Kali Ma, Om Kali Ma, Kali Durga Namo Namah, Kali Durga Namo Namah. Om Kali Ma, Om Kali Ma, Kali Durga Namo Namah, Kali Durga Namo Namah. Om Kali Ma. Kalim Durga Namo Namah. Kalim Durga Namo Namah. Om Kalima. Om Kalima. Kalim Durga Namo Namah. Kalim Durga Namo Namah. Om Kalima. Om Kalim Durga Namo Namah. Kalim Durga Namo Namah. Om Kalima. Om Kalim Durga Namo Namah. Kalim Durga Namo Namah. Om Kalima. Om Kalima. Kalim Durga Namo Namah. Kalim Durga Namo Namah. Om Kalima. Om Kalima. Kalim Durga Namo Namah. Kalim Durga Namo Namah. Om Kalima. Om Kalima. Kalim Durga Namo Namah. Kalim Durga Namo Namah. Om Kalima. Om Kalima. Kalim Durga Namo Namah. Kalim Durga Namo We end with this prayer, and may all our practices truly benefit everyone, and may all beings know complete freedom from suffering. Namaste. Om Kalima. Om Kalima. The effulgent one, the dark one, the ocean of consciousness and bliss, beyond all names and forms, unspeakable, ineffable. Ma, Ma. Only one way to know her. Dissolve. Dissolve in her. Know the truth, that ultimate reality, the truth of who you are. Keep coming back to that. Keep coming back home to that truth. Whether it's thoughtless, whether it's spaciousness, whether it's stillness, whether it's mantra. Keep coming home. The only place the mind finds rest. Om Kalima. Om Kalima. So thank you. Thank you all for coming this evening and bringing your divine presence to this Sangha. Thank you for being ones who practice and live that truth and that light of wisdom into this poor, suffering, dark world. There's also so much light, so much love in this world. To keep our attention on that. The love, the compassion, that's there. I look forward to seeing you again in 2 weeks.